So when I talk about happiness or subjective well-being, here's what I mean. I mean people's evaluations of their lives. Is my life going well? Am I experiencing my life in positive ways? So it includes thoughts when I reflect on my life. Yeah, my life's great. My marriage is really very close to ideal. And feelings that I experience moment to moment. I'm depressed most of the time. That would say my life's not going well. Or I enjoy my activities. My life is going well. So these kind of evaluations make up what I call happiness or subjective well-being. And today I'm, in fact, not going to talk about the causes of happiness, which I've studied probably for 30 years. Instead, I'm going to talk about the consequences of happiness. So, and this is important, so listen up, because I'm not talking about happiness as the goal at the end of the rainbow. So you work really hard and get your mind right and meditate and everything, and then you get happy. No, what I'm saying is happiness is the beginning point. You choose it, you achieve it early in life, because happiness is a thing that will give you a more successful, more helpful, more beneficial life. So it is a cause of good things, not the consequence just of having done good things. And this is a new way of thinking about happiness as a necessary ingredient to the good life, starting out early in life, not something you get later. And the second thing I'll talk about today are the national accounts of well-being that are all of a sudden coming about. It's amazing, and I think it's an entree for all of us in the kind of work and thinking we do to have more input into policy and more input into shaping society. By measuring well-being, we can see the things that are important in people's lives beyond money, and then the kinds of things that people in this room think about and are concerned about can have an effect, and they'll be reflected in those measures. So let's begin with the consequences. Is happiness really a good thing? Is it pleasant? Oh yeah, you feel good when you're happy, but really you're kind of dumb. You're kind of, you don't understand the world. That's why you're happy. You don't realize all the problems out there. So Barbara Ehrenreich, a writer in the U.S., just wrote a book, and she said, the reason that America went into Iraq and Afghanistan, and the reason we have global warming and all that, the reason for that is Americans are too happy. If they were a little grouchier, we wouldn't have those problems. And what I'm here today to show you is that's absolutely not true. There may be reasons why Americans have gotten in trouble, but it's not because they're too happy. Flaubert agreed with Ehrenreich. He said, to be stupid, selfish, and have good health are 3 requirements for happiness. Though if stupidity is lacking, all is lost. Okay, so clearly Flaubert did not think happiness was a good thing. Here's a young lady. She also wonders about it. Dear Mom and Dad, thanks for the happy childhood. You've destroyed any chance I had of becoming a writer. Okay, so you got to be miserable to really be successful and be smart and creative. So the last time I was on the stage with the Dalai Lama a few years ago in Canada, I said to the Dalai Lama, is it ever bad to be happy? And he said, oh yeah, there's stupid happiness. And I said, what's stupid happiness? And he said, well, when a bear's chasing you and you just stop and you're really happy, that's stupid. So it is stupid, right? We don't want to be happy every moment. We don't want to be happy at our mother's funeral. There are cases where happiness is inappropriate, but what I'm saying is that in the long run, it has a lot of good consequences. Despondex, are you annoyingly happy? Despondex may be right for you. Right? So that you're not too happy anymore. What I'm here to do is to tell you about evidence that shows, and I think it's strong evidence, that happiness is beneficial because it causes better health and longevity, better social relationships, including good citizenship. It's not just good for you, but it's good for the world, and more productivity at work. Okay, so these are very important, and we have to get this message out to business leaders and policy makers because happiness is good for people and good for the society. Let's begin with happiness and health and longevity because I've been looking at those data very closely, and I came to these data being a little skeptical, and I've walked away saying, wow, they are very strong. So many of you know about the famous Nun Study, and we know that there were happy and unhappy nuns in the study, and that the happy nuns, the most cheerful nuns, lived on average 11 years longer than the least happy nuns. And the importance of that is that the nuns all live in the same situation. They have more or less the same diet. They have the same housing. So it's a controlled environment, and controlling for those things, the happy nuns live longer. And you may say, well, we're not nuns, right? This is an unusual sample. It's weird. How do you generalize from nuns? It may not be us, and so forth. So let's look at a more normal group of people. Psychologists. Okay. And Sarah Pressman did her dissertation on psychologists, like 70 psychologists. She found that those who are happy, and she judged this by reading their autobiographies and seeing how many happy words were in their autobiographies and unhappy words. And she found that the happy psychologists live 5 or 6 years longer than the least happy psychologists. And then an interesting thing happened. She found my autobiography on the internet, and she sent it through her program and analyzed it, and she emailed me. She was excited. She said, Ed, you're the most happy psychologist that I've ever studied, of the 75 or so psychologists I've studied. And I said, wow, that's really great. I'm really happy. But let me tell you, Sarah, I had read your dissertation before I wrote my autobiography. So I wanted to live longer, so of course I wrote a happy one. Okay, these studies are cute, the psychologist study, the nun study, but we've now looked at studies that are more solid, more rigorous, bigger, studies with tens of thousands of people followed over decades. And you get happiness at time 1, and you control for health at time 1, and you see that the happy people on average in almost all the studies live longer. Experimental studies where you put people in a good mood and other people in a bad mood, and then you look at physiological things like their immune function or their cortisol levels, and you see that happy moods produce more beneficial physiological responses. Quasi-experimental studies where you go in and you look at data in an area that's just had some traumatic event like an earthquake, and you see that the heart rate attacks shoot up. Animal studies where animals live in conditions that would produce unhappiness or happiness, and the happy animals are healthier and live longer, and so forth. So we concluded, Michaela Chan and I, that the evidence linking happiness to health and longevity is clear and compelling. It's hard for me to look at all those data and say it's not true. It is absolutely true. The data are not beyond a reasonable doubt. You can still probably bring up this or that study, but they are very strong that happiness leads to longevity. So not only do happy people live longer, but they're healthier, and they're healthier for a number of reasons. The first one is they have stronger cardiovascular systems. It seems like healthy people, for some reason, have less plaque buildup in their arteries and so forth. And it's not just negative affect producing stress that causes artery buildup, but it's that positive people have, even when you control negative affect, have a healthier system. They have less inflammation, which is low-level, kind of crude immune response that can hurt your system over the long run. Stronger immune systems. So Shel Cohen has showed very clearly that happy people are able to fight off a cold or flu. They're more likely to do that. Happy people, when you put an antigen under their skin, which is, they're going to react against it, they have a stronger immune response to that. And then better health behavior. So Laura Kubzansky at Harvard has just done a big review article in which she looked at happy people's health behaviors, things like wearing seat belts. And what she found is happy people are more likely to exercise. Depressed people don't exercise much. They're more likely to eat healthy. They're more likely to wear seat belts. They're more likely to do a whole series of healthy behaviors. So for a whole variety of reasons, happy people do better in the health and longevity domain. And we know there's exceptions. It's not a guarantee. Any more than smoking is a guarantee you'll die of cancer. Some people live to 100 and they smoked, and some people die at 30 and didn't smoke. So there's nothing that's perfect guarantee, but it increases your likelihood of being healthy and living longer. It's causal. I want to say this, and I want to make it very clear. It's not just that happy people are happy because they were healthy. What I'm saying is happiness can come first as well and cause you to be happy. It's not just a consequence. The next area I want to talk about is social relationships. We find that this is very strong, which is to say happy people have better social relationships in many different ways. They feel more sociable. I'll show you a study that shows that. They have more friends. Other people like them more. They're more likely to get married. Once they do get married, they're less likely to get divorced. They're more likely to volunteer and donate, and they're better organizational citizens. That means they help other people on the job, even when it's not required from their work. So in so many domains, happy people are better at getting along with others. And it's not just that happiness helps them, it helps other people around them, including their society. Okay, so Michael Cunningham did a study in which he showed that he divided people randomly, and he took an experimental group who he made happy. He induced positive affect there, a neutral group, a negative group. And what you find is that once you put people in a good mood, they're more sociable. They want to wait with other people, talk to other people. They're more self-confident. They want to be with other people. When you put people in a bad mood, they say things like, I want to take a nap. I want to avoid people. I'm not very interested in physical activity. They want to avoid exercise, right? They feel tired. So positive moods make you more outgoing in general. Who do you want to be with? Moaner Lisa or Happy Lisa? Okay, a bad joke, but the point here being that they put people in a lab experiment and you interact with another person. And the other person is sort of depressed or the other person's happy. And then you go away and rate how much did you like the person. And everybody likes the happy person, and people tend not to like the unhappy person. And furthermore, you say, who do you want to interact with again then in the group? They want to interact the next time again. So people seek out happy people, and happy people are just easier to be around. We found, Marty Seligman and I, the founder of positive psychology, in a study we did, we looked at the top 5% happiest people, the real champions of happiness. And we were wondering what characterized them. And one thing was very, very clear, and that is every single one of them had close, supportive relationships. In psychology, you tend to find trends, but this wasn't a trend. Every single one of them, there was not an exception. It wasn't that every person they knew was their friend or that they didn't fight with anybody. It was that they all had some people in their lives. It was a partner, friends, family who were close and supportive to them without exception. So here is my wonderful wife, Carol, who's with me. And this is me and her last week. No. This is when we met. This is 50 years ago when we were 16 years old. And, I'm just embarrassed by this picture because I can see why I liked her, but I can't see why she liked me as a dorky young teenager. But so I was attracted to Carol because she's a beautiful woman, because she was smart. But one of the things that I probably didn't know that I should be attracted to was this smile here on her face. Because when you look at yearbook studies and you look at women's yearbook in high school, the women who smile more are more likely to get married and less likely to get divorced and more likely to rate their marriage as good. Now remember, this is way before they ever get married, so it's not the marriage causing them to be happy. They're happy people, and they tend to get married and have happy marriages more. And so I was just very lucky because, I made the decision on some reasons, but there was another good one I didn't know about. In our study, we studied thousands of people and have followed them over decades, and we've analyzed data from Germany that started in 1985 and started with young people, and now those young people are married and divorced and so forth. Many years later, 30,000. So most of them were not married at the time. And what we found in that study is that those who were happy back when they were age 18 and 20, long before they got married, were more likely to get married, and if they did get married, less likely to get divorced. So again, the same thing that the yearbook study shows, but a much bigger and stronger study showing that happiness precedes and causes good relations. That's why we don't want it just to be a consequence. My gosh, if I work hard, maybe by age 50 I'll be successful and meditate and have my mind right and I'll finally be happy. No, you want to be happy early on. You want to make that choice and do the things because it's going to help you lead a more successful life. Happy people are better organizational citizens. So they help others more. We find in our research that happy people donate more and happy people volunteer more. They give their time to work more. When I used to talk about happiness being beneficial, the student would say, beneficial for who? It just feels good and they're healthy, but what good is it for society? Well, they donate more to charity and volunteer more and they're better citizens. So it is good for society, not just good for that person. Next slide. So there's a virtuous circle. Good moods make people more altruistic. Over and over we see this in studies, that when you put people in a good mood, they're more likely to help people, they're more likely to give money to charity, etc. That's a very strong finding in social psychology. But John Helliwell and others show that when you give money, you also now are in a better mood. So there's a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle between happiness and helping other people. Next slide. Happiness on the job. So what do I mean by happiness on the job? I mean things like job satisfaction. You like your work, you're satisfied with your work, engagement with your job, you're really caught up within it, you find it interesting, you really think about it. I tell people, you know, I think about my work in the evening when I'm in the shower, I'm thinking about psychology, so I really enjoy my work. That's what we mean by happiness on the job, and what we now know, next slide, is, we know that a lot of employers think that this is baloney. I don't care whether my workers are happy. Don't they know that it's called work for a reason? It's work, it's not fun. And I want them to work hard. And they can have fun when they get off work in the evening, right? But when they're here, I want them to be serious and not be happy and just be working hard. Well, this is a very short-sighted view because all the data now show that happy workers are better workers. I mean, think about it for a moment. If you can get a guy like Ed Diener, who loves it, I mean, just drawn to it, then you've got somebody who's just going to be working hard all the time. I mean, I work some evenings, I work some weekends, I'm thinking about it when I'm driving, etc. So you get somebody who's really committed and loves their work, you've got a productive employee. Gallup organization, who I work for part-time, did a huge study, 5,000 work units, so it's just a huge study, and they looked over time at various factors in the workplace, and what they found was, over at time one, on the left, that engagement with work and job satisfaction led later to greater customer loyalty. Of course, if your employees like their work, they're going to be positive. If they don't like their work and they interact with the public, they're going to be negative. So customers like them, and therefore they have these kind of stores and businesses have greater customer loyalty. Not only that, but these kind of businesses have lower turnover. Their employees don't quit as much. And if you know about the business world, you know that employee turnover is a hugely expensive thing and a huge problem because you have to train new people. You have to go out and look for new people. I mean, you lose an executive, it's probably going to cost you over $100,000 to hire a new one, to find the right person, etc. So turnover is a huge thing in business. And because happy people in the workplace produce those two things, these workplaces have greater financial performance. That is, they make more money, in other words, and that is what employers care about. So that old employer is a tough guy, doesn't care if his workers are happy or not, he better start caring. Worker satisfaction and firm value. Alex Edmonds at Wharton, probably the premier business school in the world at University of Pennsylvania, showed that if you look at stock prices of companies like the Forbes 500 or one of those big stock indexes with lots of companies, and you look how satisfied the workers are, and then you follow it over time, the companies in which workers are satisfied, their share prices go up more. Now, this is very important because, remember, share prices reflect all those things we know about a company. So things like price-earnings ratio and new products the company has. You see, investors know about all those things. So over here at time one, all those things are taken into account in the share price. But the investors don't know about how happy the workers are. That's not published anywhere. So the fact that the happy workplaces shares went up more in value showed that controlling for all these other economic and business type factors, that how happy the workers are makes an increase. Sometimes people say, oh, but it's only 5%. I say, are you crazy? 5% is huge in the business world. I mean, it's an enormous effect in this competitive business world that we have. So it's very important for your workers to be happy. So businesses with happy workers, number one, have lower health care costs. In the USA, I don't know about here, but health care costs are just crushing businesses and our society. I mean, they're just hugely expensive. So when you have healthier workers, and by the way, happy workers take fewer sick days, so that's also costly for companies. You have greater customer loyalty, you have lower employee turnover, you also have greater productivity, oh, thank you, and you have greater employee creativity. Why? Because when people are in a good mood, they are more creative. Again, laboratory evidence shows over and over, you put people in a good mood, they become more creative, their thinking becomes more flexible and so forth. You put people in a neutral mood, they're less creative. So the point here is that for so many reasons, we have to get this word out to business leaders. Your worker happiness counts. It makes a big difference. We're not going to talk about all the things that cause worker happiness. And of course, pay matters, benefits matter, but a lot of things matter. Flex time, having daycare, taking care of women in the workplace, being respected in the workplace, thinking that your supervisor respects you, having the right tools to work with, knowing clearly what your goals and aims are of the business and your job, etc. So we know a lot about what causes happiness and satisfaction in the workplace, but the point is now to convince the business leaders this is important. It is going to help your bottom line, and since that's what they care about, they're going to be interested in these kind of data. So business leaders, you better care if your workers are happy. Okay, so subjective well-being is causal. It's not just caused by health or caused by good relations. It causes them. And the implication then is society needs happy people. We really need it. It's like we need educated people. We need ethical people. We need people who have high subjective well-being. It's important too. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about are the national accounts of subjective well-being. So over the years, I've written a series of articles. I used to go out and talk about it in the 90s, and I'd talk to economists, and they would absolutely hate the idea. I'd say, we have national accounts of the economy. We track, and it costs millions of dollars a year, tracking GDP and unemployment and interest rates and on and on. I mean, there's hundreds of these economic indicators. What we ought to do is also track subjective well-being, people's happiness, their positive affect, their life satisfaction, their job satisfaction. And they would just shout me down. I could barely say 3 words, and I could barely get off the stage. They hated this idea. But now, all of a sudden, it's coming around. And I wrote this book. Don't go out and buy this book. It bores me even to death. It's... But the reason I show you this book is because all the arguments are there. So if the economist doesn't believe you, give them this book because it really has all the arguments in there. And then they'll just believe it because they don't want to read the book either because it's pretty dense and difficult. But the point is, we made, and this book is scholarly. We made all the arguments that they have against it. Can't believe self-report. We show why these arguments are not true. The government shouldn't interfere in happiness. It's paternalistic. We show why that's not true, et cetera, et cetera. So we run through all the different arguments for the accounts of well-being. So what do we mean by that? We mean that the governments of countries start in systematic ways looking at the different groups in society and tracking their happiness in different activities over time. And by doing that, you will get insights into policy. I mean, why do we track economics? Because you think if you know about employment rate and you know about inflation rate and stuff, there's things we can do. Similarly, if you know which groups are happy and which groups are unhappy, when people are happy and when people are unhappy in society, we know things that we can do to improve the quality of life. So we're saying the economic accounts are important, but they don't capture all the things we need to know, and we need these accounts to add to them. Why measure happiness? First of all, we measure it because it's democratic. All people want it. In fact, in a college student study around the world, 40-some countries, we found that college students rated happiness the #1 value and goal. They also rated, things like ethics and love and good health very highly. But happiness was a bit higher even than those. And they rated wealth down as middling important, and they rated getting to heaven as even less important. But they rated, happiness right up at the top. People want to be happy. So by giving that to them, right, it's doing something that people want. Secondly, it's good for society, as we've just been talking about. It gives you better health, more productivity, and relationships. Why to monitor it? Because it's good in itself, just like education. Why do we want to know how educated our kids are getting in the first 12 years of school, how much they're learning, and we monitor that? Why? Because we think education's a good thing. It's good for people, it's good for society, and happiness is good for people and good for society. So we want to monitor it to see where we stand. And then finally, we monitor subjective well-being because it reflects the quality of life of the society. And money does that to an extent. After all, it's better to have money than to be starving, right? So we know that we want to monitor money a little bit, but in the subjective well-being measures, we go far beyond the things that money affects. We pick up other things that affect quality of life. So for example, the social life of the society. Subjective well-being will reflect to some degree the social capital in society, how much people want to help each other. So for example, in our Gallup World Poll, we say if you lose your wallet, would a policeman return it, police officer? Would a stranger return it? Would a neighbor return it? And in some countries like Denmark, they say all those people, 90% say a stranger would return their wallet. Whereas you go to other countries in the world and they say nobody would return it, including my next door neighbor. So they do not have social capital, right? Social capital is so important. We trust people, they trust us, we can rely on people, they will help us in an emergency. Social support, we ask people, do you have somebody you can count on in an emergency? And in some countries, that number is 95% say yes. Yeah, I have somebody I can count on, of course. Take me to the hospital if I get sick. And in some countries, it's like 30%. Imagine, you have nobody that you can rely on. Everybody for themselves, everybody against everybody. And so subjective well-being picks this up. And so it's not just money, but in the subjective well-being numbers, you also see how the society's doing socially. Whether people feel respect for each other, whether people can count on others and volunteer and so forth. And then at the bottom, we see the negatives that lower subjective well-being. So subjective well-being picks up bad things in the social world, like crime, high murder rate, can't trust others, corruption. We're just publishing a study now that shows that corruption brings down both life satisfaction and positive affect significantly and hurts those in a society. So it's subjective well-being measures very broad. It picks up more than just the monetary measures do. In the environmental realm, we now know that things like green space increase happiness. If you have greenery around inside buildings, if you have greenery outside with parks or tree-lined streets and so forth, people are happier. Very, very rigorous studies done where you put people in a doctor's office waiting and there's greenery or there's not greenery, and then you look at physiological indicators and you see people are calmer physiologically and they feel calmer and so forth. So green space has a lot of good advantages, but the subjective well-being measures reflect that. They pick it up to a degree. People in a hospital, for example, who are on this side of the hospital and look out on the park and the greenery, and then on the other side of the hospital, across the hall, they look out on the parking lot. These people get out of the hospital quicker who are looking out at the greenery, right? A day quicker because they just heal more quickly. And then on the negative side, we know that the subjective well-being measures pick up in a negative way. They're lowered by things like air pollution. So if you live downwind from a power plant, that's a coal power plant that's spitting out air pollution, your life satisfaction's lower. And when you put a scrubber on that power plant chimney that takes out the air pollution, reduces it by 95%, the people's life satisfaction downwind goes up. We know that airport noise can lower, if you live right under the path of the where the airplanes land, can lower life satisfaction. And we know that difficult commuting, long difficult commutes, you drive an hour to work, you drive an hour back, lowers life satisfaction. Why? Because not only is commuting stressful when it's difficult, but also that's 2 hours you're not doing something with your family and friends. That's 2 hours you've lost when you're not doing something that would be more pleasant. So we know that these environmental factors and these social factors, as well as monetary factors, are picked up by the subjective well-being measures, and that's why we're saying that you need to include these national accounts of subjective well-being. Marty Seligman and I wrote an article about 8 years ago called Beyond Money Toward an Economy of Well-Being, in which we argue that, yes, economics has been important. It's been important because, now we can feed people and we have housing for people and so forth. So it's developed the material world, but we're now in a post-materialistic world where we're caring more and more about things beyond money. We don't just want more and more money, more and more luxuries. We want these other things, and the subjective well-being measures are going to help us get there. This is a fellow that our son interviewed in the slums of Calcutta. His name is Moaner. You can see he's a rickshaw driver, and you can also see his house there, which is a shantytown house. Of course, no plumbing, no toilet, no running water, no heating or air conditioning, and a picture of Moaner. And he scored pretty highly on our happiness test. So Robert said, Moaner, how can you be happy? Our people back home won't believe it. They're going to see how poor you are. You make $1 a day, $2 a day, $3 in a good day. They're not going to believe you're happy. He said, well, listen, let me tell you why I'm pretty happy. If I had more money, I'd probably be even a little bit happier. But here's why I'm happy. I go off to work, and I do the rickshaw, and I come home, and that day I made $3, and I can afford to spend a couple cents and buy candy for my kids, and I give them each a candy. And my kids see me coming far away, and they run to me, Dad, Dad, and they give me a big hug. And then they step back and look at me. And I pull out that candy, and they squeal, and they're so excited, and I give them the candy and hug them. And he said, that's why I'm happy, because I can do things for my kids. And he said, I love my wife, and I love my kids. And surprisingly, I love my rickshaw driving. A lot of people say, oh, this is a low-status job and all that. You shouldn't do it and all that. He says, I like doing it, and I have my religion. So there's all these things in Moaner's life that lead him to be happy. He would be happier if he had more money because he could afford better health care and so forth for his kids. But he's happy already because of these non-monetary things in his life. So it's so important for us to realize that we need to broaden beyond the idea that progress is just economic growth. We have made amazing progress in getting national accounts of subjective well-being in. And as I told you, when I talked in the 90s, and The Economist shouted me down. And then in 2000, I wrote an article in American Psychologists calling for this. And all of a sudden, in the last 5 or 8 years, it's coming about. It's gotten to be just the rage. And economists like it now. Alan Kruger works, he's the chief economic advisor for President Obama. And he's written articles on this stuff and worked with me and Danny Kahneman on well-being. So it's very close to the President of the United States. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, announced several years ago, we are going to institute measures of well-being. We're going to measure positive feelings. We're going to measure life satisfaction, meaning and purpose in life. We're going to measure on the negative side, unhappiness and so forth. And we're going to use that to track and to influence policy. Now, I was just in Mexico City. They're doing it. Chile's doing it. Japan is looking at it, et cetera, et cetera. I counted it up. 20 different countries now are either instituting national measures of subjective well-being, or they've got big high-level committees looking at that. I'm in a National Academy of Sciences committee in the U.S. that's just issuing a report on it right now. But the OECD, that's the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD has just in 2013 issued guidelines about instituting measures of national subjective well-being. This is hugely important. Why? Because the OECD kind of coordinates statistics between the countries of the world, and they work for the 34 or so richest countries in the world, and the United States, Australia, Mexico being one of the poor, but in there, all the European countries, they coordinate statistics. So all of a sudden, the statistical offices get this very positive, surprisingly positive report from the OECD, written by economists, not by psychologists, saying the measures are good and you ought to consider using them. This is a huge event because I think it means it's going to happen. And then we have to wait and see whether the politicians will use the measures. Here's where Australia would stand. We've got about 160 countries, so I'm not showing them all. I'm just showing selected countries. And as you can see, Denmark is the highest in life satisfaction. You can see a country like Costa Rica, very high in positive experience, enjoying life. The U.S. and Australia are very similar, and Australia being slightly higher in some of these. And, you see these over and over, which country's the happiest and everything. And somebody said to me yesterday, this fun and games and a competition about who's happiest. And I said, that's right. It's not really important who's happiest. What's important is looking within your country and seeing who's happy and who's not happy, because the policy relevance of that, this stuff of fun and games, is Australia happier than the United States? It's nice from newspaper articles, but here's what's really important. Let's look within Australia, in life satisfaction in Australia, and we see that there's about half of Australians are very satisfied or extremely satisfied, so that's good. But at the other end, we see groups that are very dissatisfied or neutral, which is really in satisfaction negative in our data. So, 1 in 10 or whatever, 1 in 7. And, and I bet you'll find that indigenous people score more likely in that category. I don't know that, but I know from the United States that would likely be an extrapolation. We know that people in very poor areas in the United States, I know which counties in the United States, in Kentucky, in certain farm areas where there's very poor farm workers and so forth. So we start using these data to look at groups, not just comparing us to the United States. Did you enjoy yesterday? Did you smile? Were you proud? And 2/3 of Australians say yes, so that's great. The problem is that 10% say absolutely not at all. And so those people are the ones we have to worry about. And perhaps this is the one I worry about the most for Australia. Were you sad, depressed, angry, and worried yesterday? And 3% of Australians say I was all of those most of yesterday. So that's very negative to have felt all of those most of the day. But 39% say I felt some of those most of yesterday. So that's 40% of people who are feeling quite a bit of negative affect. And we do find that rich countries have more stress. So we'd have to go back and look, is it all in worry or is it also in depression and anger? But the point being that the measures can tell you, and then you go in more finely and look at who and when and why this is coming about to get this hold on national policy. So in conclusion, happiness is good for the individual. It's good for society. It's not just nice feeling, pleasant, but you're goofy. It's really good for people to have this. We need national accounts of subjective well-being because it is good for society, and also because it helps us track things that the monetary measures don't track. And we need to go in and identify the conditions in Australia and our own other countries leading to dissatisfaction, to negative affect, and to positive affect, so we can better pinpoint where our interventions will come. And thank you very much.